Okay, oops. Hello, everyone. I think we'll give a second or two for people to join the webinar. We welcome everyone here to our Social Behavior Change Community Practice webinar on reducing demand for illegal wild meat in Thailand, lesson learned from the Kind Dining campaign. And just to start with some basic housekeeping, my name is Eileen Larney from Zoological Society of London. And we just want to inform everyone that this webinar is being recorded. And in addition, we do ask that feel free in the chat box to introduce yourselves. But we do ask that you otherwise refrain from using the chat unless you have some technical issues where we will then address them. And please use the question and answer box for questions that we will compile and later in the session be able to hopefully have time to answer for you. So starting out this webinar tonight, I'd like to transition over to Gayle Burgess, who's works with Traffic as the lead of their Social and Behaviour Change communication portfolio of work. So Gayle, I'll turn it over to you to welcome and start off the webinar tonight.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Eileen. And yeah, very big warm welcome to everybody. Really nice to see lots of familiar faces and some new names too. Hopefully you'll enjoy today's session. We've got a packed agenda for you. This webinar actually represents the first Social and Behaviour Change community webinar for a little bit. We're excited to share with you a really great case study on a topic that probably hasn't been covered so much in many of the Asia demand reduction and social and behaviour change initiatives. So excited to have some great speakers and exciting panelists lined up, and hopefully you'll feel like you've gathered some new inspiration to inform much of your own work. So the agenda is very tight today. I'm not going to take too long to introduce the session and our first speaker. Just to explain the format of today's hour. So I'll shortly be followed by two presentations from some speakers who will introduce the research and evidence base that informed the Kind Dining campaign, and also then go into some depth around the activities that were delivered, the partnerships that were fostered, and an overview of what that achieved. From then, we'll be able to move into some panel reflections, just to hear from senior leaders in this field, in particular to welcome the Thailand Department of National Parks and also the Global Wildlife Programme, who have sort of a role as the umbrella organisation for the GEF supported initiatives working on combating wildlife crime for sustainable development. And from them we'll be able to go into a short Q&A session, as Eileen has just outlined. So without further ado, to help us make sure we get through our agenda on time, it's my pleasure to introduce Daniel Bergin to you today. Daniel's an associate director at research agency GlobeScan, whose name will probably be quite familiar to those of you who have done work on demand reduction in Asia before. Daniel leads the portfolio of work there on illegal wildlife trade, and yeah, we're excited to hear from him today to share some of the insights that informed the evidence base for the Kind Dining initiative in Thailand. Over to you, Daniel. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Gayle. I'll just share my screen. Okay, so I'm just going to run through some of the highlights of the piece of work that we did to inform this campaign. So to start with, just a bit about the context, description, and methodology. We conducted this piece of research in two phases: a qualitative phase, which involved two focus groups in Bangkok and was conducted in February 2021. Each focus group consisted of 6 people and lasted for 2 hours. And we mixed ages and genders. We got people who had eaten wild meat in the past to ask them about their views and get some very in-depth insights into why they prefer this food. We also did a qualitative phase, with 1,300 participants. This was conducted online and it lasted about 15 minutes. This was conducted in April 2021, and to ensure that we got a representative sample from all across Thailand and of different genders, ages, regions, and education, we put quotas on the people that were taking part in the study. So the research objectives, we wanted to find out who was buying wild meat, why they were buying wild meat, what they had bought in the past, what were the most popular forms of wild meat, where they were finding information. And then we wanted to find out a deeper understanding of what was driving them to choose wild meat over domestic meat, and what could we use to deter them from buying this in the future. So to do this, we looked at the communications, what were the best messages and narratives that would help change their mind, and who would be the best to deliver these messages. So the results. Of our sample, we gave people a definition of wild meat. We told them that it refers to meat from non-domestic, non-livestock terrestrial animals. So any wild mammal, reptile, or bird. And domestic meat is meat from livestock, such as beef, chicken, or pork. And that included fish for the purposes of this study. So 32% of people identified that they'd eaten wild meat in the past 12 months. And of these, we found that younger people were more likely to have eaten wild meat in the past 12 months, and this declined with age. And looking at the regions, we found that the northern, eastern, and southern regions were the most popular for wild meat, and eastern, but it was relatively well dispersed throughout Thailand. And we also found that high-income people who had a propensity to travel were more likely to have eaten wild meat in the past 12 months. And looking at the frequency, 22% of people said that they ate wild meat once a week or more, and 43%, the largest proportion, said they ate it once or a few times per month. We then gave participants a list of species. So these species were the ones we had identified as the wild meat species in Thailand, and we asked them if they had eaten wild meat in the past, eaten any of these species in the past 12 months. And a higher proportion than originally had said they ate wild meat, 37%, said that they had eaten one of these species in the past 12 months, meaning that some people hadn't identified the species that they've been eating as wild meat. So wild boar are the most popular species, followed by red jungle fowl, and then snake, crocodile, deer, and squirrel. And we asked people if they intended to eat wild meat in the future. 32% said that they probably would or definitely would eat wild meat in the future. Again, this was higher in younger people. It was a relatively even split between men and women, and it's much higher, 73%, in people who had eaten wild meat in the past 12 months. So having eaten in the past was a good indicator that people wanted to eat it again in the future. And we asked people about where they ate the wild meat. So people were eating it at home, in a restaurant, or in a friend or relative's home. And also in upcountry. So this refers to any area outside Bangkok. We asked people who had eaten it at home where they bought this wild meat or where they had obtained this wild meat. And the majority of people said that they had obtained it from an outdoor market or from people they know. So family or friends had given it to them. We also wanted to know about domestic travel for wild meat. So we asked people if they had ever traveled within Thailand for the purposes of consuming wild meat, and 53% said that they had. We asked them then where they were traveling within the country to purchase and eat this meat, and northern and northeastern Thailand were the most popular regions to travel to eat wild meat. And considering wild meat that was raised in a farm, so the same species, but contained in a farm, versus those coming directly from the wild, we asked people where the wild meat that they had come from, where the wild meat that they had eaten had come from. And 58% said that it had come from a wildlife farm, while 33% said that they ate wild meat coming directly from the wild. The remaining didn't know where their meat had come from. And then we asked for preference. So 43% of people say they prefer wild meat that comes from a farm, and 33% again say that they prefer wild meat that comes from the wild. We also wanted to know about the disease risk that people perceived of wild meat that comes from a wildlife farm versus wild meat that comes from the wild. So 12% of people say that eating wildlife from a farm poses a much greater risk, and 6% say that it poses a slighter greater risk than the disease risk of eating wild animals directly. But a larger proportion of the sample said that they believed that eating wild animals that come directly from the wild poses either a much or slightly greater risk, disease risk, than wildlife coming from farms. And this was variable between whether people had eaten wild meat in the past or whether they hadn't. So people who had eaten wild meat in the past were more likely to have an even split. So a relatively similar number of people said that the farms pose a greater disease risk, as say that the wild animals pose a greater disease risk. Whereas those who have never eaten wild meat are more likely to say that eating animals that come directly from the wild poses a greater disease risk. And we wanted to know about the drivers and deterrents. What was really making people eat this wild meat? So the occasions. The largest proportion of our sample said that there was no specific occasion for them eating wild meat. It was just a regular meal, followed by eating it at a festival or traveling domestically, which we identified earlier. And about the reasons. The two primary reasons, much further ahead than all of the other reasons, were taste and curiosity. So this is really what's driving people to eat the wild meat. And in a bit more depth, the drivers of wild meat the top drivers of wild meat are emotional and related to taste and health. So the emotional responses are that it brings a sense of accomplishment, excitement, and novelty. And the taste components are that wild meat tastes better or that it's more flavorful. And amongst the deterrents, there were several different categories. So disease concern was the main reason that those who hadn't eaten wild meat hadn't eaten it. So we asked them, if you haven't eaten wild meat, why have you not eaten this? They said it is more vulnerable to diseases or contamination, followed by animal cruelty. So it is cruel or unethical to kill animals for their meat. Sorry, that should say their meat. Then conservation related, hunting animals will bring them to extinction, and that people in their network would oppose this. And amongst those who had eaten wild meat in the past 12 months, but didn't intend to eat it in the future, we see a relatively similar breakdown. So to stop cruelty against animals was the reason they stopped eating wild meat, and to preserve nature. These are the two primary reasons, quite far ahead of the others. And for the messengers, who did people trust most for their information about wild meat? So primarily it was experts, so academics or research institutions, scientists, doctors and pharmacists all rank highly, and government, so the local or national governments. People trust them to give them information about wild meat above public figures, above personal relationships. And buying wild meat in Thailand. So 11% of our sample believe that purchasing wild meat is easy or very easy, compared to 3 times that number who say it's very hard or impossible. And this is quite variable by regions, with the northeastern region being seen as the most difficult region to buy wild meat, and the western region being the easiest to buy it. And the availability of wild meat over the past 5 years. So our sample largely identified that there is a bit less or a lot less wild meat available now than there was 5 years ago. So 29% said a bit less, 29% said a lot less, compared to 8% who said a lot more, and 9% who said some more. And the government's efforts to stop illegal wildlife trade in Thailand, generally the public believe that the government are doing quite well in this. 32%, a third of the sample, say that the government is doing everything possible to stop illegal wildlife trade in Thailand. And 36% believe that the government is doing well, compared to just 19% who believe they're doing poorly, and 8% who believe that they're not doing anything at all. So in summary, younger, more affluent consumers who travel regularly have a significantly higher likelihood of buying or intending to buy wild meat. Wild meat consumption is highest in southern Thailand, while northeastern and northern Thailand are the areas that people travel to get their wild meat. So almost a third of the participants consider wild meat as part of their diet, but 37% say that they've eaten at least one of the target species in the past 12 months, most commonly wild boar or red jungle fowl. And 32% say they will definitely or probably eat wild meat in the future, while 64%, the majority, say that they won't, or they definitely or probably won't. And wild meat is often a social event. So the majority of people, 60%, eat it with their family or friends. Taste and curiosity are some of the primary reasons that people eat wild meat, and they value the emotional benefits of eating it, such as a sense of accomplishment, excitement, novelty. For those who felt that they were influenced by somebody to try or eat wild meat, it was primarily by their peers, their friends, acquaintances, and work colleagues, though 31% say they make the decision solely by themselves. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Daniel. Huge amounts of rich insight there, and great to have that succinct overview from you. Thank you so much. So I think now we are going to share Dararat's presentation. So thank you very much for loading that, Carly. So yeah, looking forward to hearing from Dararat Weerapong. Dararat has been leading the delivery of the work arising from this insight in Thailand. She's our senior project manager with traffic, and I think she's going to just share with you some examples of the materials that were delivered there as well. So without further ado, over to you, Dararat. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gayle. You can hear me clearly. No? Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity for me to speak. My talk tonight will cover two parts, which are the campaign execution and campaign impact evaluation. The formative research that we heard from Daniel earlier provides very important insights into the attitude and behaviors of wild meat consumption in Thailand. Understanding the consumer is crucial to designing effective campaigns to stop illegal wild meat consumption. The campaigns combine the words kindness and fine dining to remind people that the best meals do not harm wild animals nor risk their own health. The campaign aims to reduce demand for illegal wild meat and change attitudes of people who consume such meat in order to create society and behavior change for people to say no to illegal wild meat. Being the first SBC campaign to tackle wild meat consumption in the country, we target the new generation who are between 18 to 30 years old. They have very good income, which is around $1,400 per month, living in urban areas, travel regularly at least twice a year before the pandemic. What are we going to talk with them? When it comes around eating wild meat, the research tells us that the messages that would resonate to this group is about conservation, threats to animal health, disease transmission, and food safety, or the alternatives to food. Under the umbrella of all of them would say the same thing. 3 new generations say no to illegal wild meat. We choose messengers who deliver different sub-messages. The first one is a young man on the left. He is Sky, the actor. He's very popular among youngsters. He has 1.7 million followers on IG. His message will be relevant to a conservation and threats to animal. A lady in the middle, she's Chef Tam. She's the first winner of the Top Chef in Thailand. She owns a fine dining restaurant. Throughout her career, she advocates for the sustainable consumption. She will focus on food safety and alternative meals. And a gentleman on the far right, Dr. Lotta. a wildlife vet from the Department of National Park Wildlife and Plant Conservation. He is also very popular and has lots of followers on social media. He will deliver message related to zoonotic disease and health. In terms of like the consumer journey, we have like the 3 steps. The first one, because we would like to raise the awareness of the consumer. So there are 3 videos produced, and then we want to persuade them. And after that, we would like them to take action. This campaign started from 23rd of November last year, and it was running until 14th of February this year. Total duration is 14 weeks. So let me show you the hero videos before we go to the next slide. I will hand it over to Pai and set us out. Thank you. No sound. I don't hear the sound.
Okay, we'll just thanks, Dararat. Let's see if we can pull that back.
Yeah.
Of course, as in all great presentations, this was working perfectly yesterday.
Yeah, maybe what we can do, we can also like share the link to the video to everyone, so then can see it later.
ก็ยังถูกพรากจากป่าอย่างผิดกฎหมายมาสร้างค่านิยมคนรุ่นใหม่ไม่กินสัตว์ป่าที่ผิดกฎหมายกันเถอะครับ
Sorry about this.
พวกเขาคือสัตว์
เมืองไทยเป็นสวรรค์ของนักกินมันน่าเศร้าที่คนบางกลุ่มยังกินเนื้อสัตว์ป่าที่ผิดกฎหมายทั้งที่มีอาหารอร่อยและปลอดภัยมากมายเลยค่ะมาสร้างค่านิยมคนรุ่นใหม่ไม่กินสัตว์ป่าที่ผิดกฎหมายกันเถอะค่ะ
Sorry for the technical here.
เมืองไทย
สัตว์ป่ามีความสำคัญต่อป่า มนุษย์ไม่ควรใกล้ชิดพวกเขาเพราะเป็นแหล่งของเชื้อโรคหลายชนิดการสัมผัสหรือกินสัตว์ป่าอาจเป็นที่มาของการแพร่เชื้อโรคมาสร้างค่านิยมคนรุ่นใหม่ไม่กินสัตว์ป่าที่ผิดกฎหมายกันเถอะครับ
Thank you very much, Pa. So in terms of through these campaigns, we involve like a macro, micro, and nano influencers who are from like a different walks of life, such as actor, football player, doctor, lecturer, DJ, singer, chef, and etc. Like to express their support to the campaign and emphasis on their messages. We also gain support from content creators who use our messages but present it in the way that fit with their audience. Regarding the physical events, because of like when in December, when the travel restriction in Thailand was eased, we organized a press conference and kindness delivery activities in Chiang Mai and Bangkok. If you remember from Daniel's presentation, Chiang Mai is one of the major locations for wild meat consumption in northern Thailand. The food in the box was prepared by the celebrity chef to present the alternative meals that we can choose instead of wild meat. Of course, it was yummy and drew lots of attention from the audience. Inside the box, there is a QR code, which will lead the target group to our website and find more information and also taking action. Apart from providing information about the campaign itself, we use gamification to get our audience to pledge their support or agree that we, a new generation, say no to illegal wild meat. We should create a new social norm that eating wild meat is not socially acceptable. Because there are so many species consumed, we can't list all of them here. Therefore, the way we use is that we use the species represent their group and the team instead. Here we have the team pangolin, team tiger, team turtle, team monkey, and team hornbill. When somebody plays to a team, the bar will get taller. There's a number at the top showing a number of people who agree that they will not eat such and such species. So right after the campaign, we monitor the media, the performance of the campaign media against the key performance indicator that we set from at the beginning. As a result, we received around 15 million total impressions out of 4.5 million that we set in the beginning. In terms of total reach, is 10 million and 3.2 million video views, 800K engagement, and there are about 4,500 people join the pledge. However, that is just part of the picture. It's impressive to see that the campaign performed really well. It reached the consumer that we wanted to, but the bigger question is whether the campaign creates any impacts. So we measured this further. We conduct research to evaluate the campaign. This research combines both qualitative and quantitative phases. For the quantitative, we recruit 300 respondents and 150 booster sample. The respondent criteria are the same as we had for the campaign. The campaign concept is really well accepted by the audience. And then we also find that the campaigns and its key messages are well liked and found relevant to our audience. They agree that the new generation say no to illegal wild meat because it's important that we bond to the nature, and also in terms of contact or consumption of wild animals may transmit disease, as well as there are many goods and a lot of delicious food in Thailand, so there is no reason to eat wild meat, which will also cause the risk of disease transmission. However, if we look closer, we will see that the agreement degree among illegal wild meat consumers is a little bit less. In terms of call to actions of the campaign is rather strong, even among consumers of illegal wild meat. When they see or hear about the campaign, they want to know more. At least half of them visit the Kai Dining YouTube channel to see other videos. 1/3 of the audience share campaign details, video clips, or activities via social media. However, there are also some wild meat consumers who just watch the video and didn't participate in any activity, even if they agree that it's relevant to them. When we check whether the campaign can contribute to change of consumer attitudes toward illegal wild meat consumption after they learn about the campaign, we found that the campaign has higher impact among illegal wild meat consumers if they are exposed to the campaign. At the end, what do we get? In terms of the reach, the reach has about 1/4 of target audience. It's higher among consumers of illegal wild meat. The campaign managed to target those with experience in wild meat consumption well, but can be further improved on reach and visibility. Regarding the engagement, the campaign generates good engagement and majority find it relevant to them. Calls to action are also strong. Regarding the impacts in the motivation illegal wild meat consumption. However, some die-hard wild meat eater show some resistance to change, but the campaign left rather strong impression on them. What do we learn from this? After we do these campaigns, we find out that probably because of the limited time, we should have like a one strong campaign and execute very clear messages. And then, however, even if the time frame is rather short, but it should be like in a series, come like a continuation. And also, in order to look for who would be like the right presenter is also important. We have to find like the right one for our target audience. And also during the campaign's duration, we find that people get confused. They don't know what are illegal to eat or what are legal to eat. So it's rather mixed. This is something that I think in terms of awareness raising, we have to work harder on that to get them understand. And also try to use like the gimmick or mechanics that can optimize the impact better. Regarding, because of this depends on like the type of the target audience that we use. We can also explore other media that fit with the target audience. And we think that because this is like the first SBC, the Why Meat campaign in Thailand that using SBCC approach. So we hope that what we learned today and we share with all of you would be useful, that if any of you are planning to develop something similar and adapt it and learn from it. Thank you very much. Back to Eileen. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Dararat. So next we'll be transitioning to our guest panel, and I'd like to first introduce Petch Manopawitr, who is working with ZSL, who has also supported the campaign here with the kind dining work. And Petch, turning it over to you to introduce our panelists for this evening.
Thank you so much, Eileen, for introduction. I think it has been a timely campaign coincide with pandemic we all have experienced. So today we have distinguished panelists who are going to share their views and give some reflection for the campaign. First, we have Dr. Klairoong Poonpon, Director of CITES, Thailand Department of National Park, Wildlife and Plant Conservation. We have Lisa Farroway, from Global Wildlife Program, World Bank, and Gayle Burgess from Traffic. So first, I like to commend Department of National Park for their leadership in addressing illegal wildlife trade and prioritizing demand reduction work. So first, I'd like to hear from Dr. Klairoong to give her view and share some of her thoughts about the key takeaway from the campaign. Please, Dr. Klairoong.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity today to reflect my view on behalf of my organization. Firstly, I would like to thank Traffic and its partner for leading this initiative, the campaign, and for the Global Wildlife Program for support us on working on combating illegal wildlife trade through the combating illegal wildlife trade under the JEP6 project. And also thanks for the previous two speakers, Dararat and Daniel, for their presentation on the detail of the study and the campaign. So the guiding campaign, our view is that it was timely released when the organization DNP would like to communicate with the general public on the harm of illegal wild meat consumption that could cause serious illness and the negative impact to our natural resource. I was appreciated by the methodology of campaigning, which started from the research conducting, analyze, design the message to send to the public, together with selecting various influencers to deliver the campaign, and also finally the evaluations of the result of campaigning. That is very informative for us. So give a lot of lesson learned from that. And by the way, we conduct the campaign from designing the campaign, launching, and evaluating the campaign. DNP could find the new approach. So we have learned a lot from you that can be modified for other purpose or other needs in the future. And finally, the campaign has also give us the idea, the lesson learned, and recommendation for future that we can find what should be scaled up or what should be modified in the future. So I thank on behalf of DNP, I think on the involved partner in this campaign, and there's still a lot to work on. It's not about the campaign, but it's about the target goal of us, that I think we have the common goal, which is to change the undesired behavior of society to be something else that we need it to be. So thank you very much for your contribution in this purpose, in DNP's work, and in what we are trying to do with the society in Thailand. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Klairoong. I think I totally agree with Dr. Klairoong that this campaign is very strong in terms of monitoring and evaluation, and also how it designed based on the research, recent research, which is quite surprising to all of us. So thank you for Dr. Klairoong for her reflection. Now I'd like to invite Lisa from Global Wildlife Program, World Bank, who is coordinating a number of wildlife trade programs across the globe. So Lisa, what are your views about this campaign? And we all realize that it is the right things to do, but how can it be sustained or scale up to keep up with this crisis we are living? And what should be the next step? So please, Lisa.
Thanks, Pen. And first, I just want to say congratulations to everyone that's been involved in this, to DNP, Traffic, ZSL, UNDP, and partners for this initiative. And we've heard about its impact, but I just want to note, if you look across the entire Global Wildlife Program, there are 37 projects. I think this was one of the first projects across the Global Wildlife Program to adapt their work plan in response to COVID, and to see, how do we need to look at the interface between wildlife trade and potential health risks. And I'm really pleased that they took that initiative, as this gives us valuable lessons to share across the Global Wildlife Program. And as everyone on this call will realize, illegal wild meat consumption is present in so many countries, not only Asia, but also Africa and Latin America. And so the lessons that we've heard about today, I think will be relevant for many of our GWP projects. And I've seen a number of the projects from Asia and Africa on this call, so thanks for joining. I think this campaign gives us really valuable insights on what drives consumption of illegal wild meat, and also a good example of a campaign that's been developed based on consumer insights and at different stages for behavior change. And within the Global Wildlife Program, we find there's been relatively limited attention within the projects on demand reduction. So these examples, I think, are highly relevant and can show other projects, here's what you can do within these projects, which may also in parallel be focusing on policy change, law enforcement, or some site-based efforts. So the second question on how it can be scaled up or replicated, as we heard, a limiting factor here was the length of time for the campaign due to contracts ending. This is a reality that we all know we live with. I really appreciated Dararat saying, think about how you can have shorter term, concise messaging that can then run in series. So one point I wanted to mention is for scaling up or replicating, if other people want to try a similar thing in different countries, the opportunities that are available through the upcoming GEF 8 cycle, which is just commencing now. So included within the Jeff 8 cycle is an integrated program on wildlife conservation. And the integrated programs at Jeff are programs that Jeff emphasizes as the priority initiatives. For the first time, there's one on wildlife as one of 11 integrated programs. And there is a financial incentive for countries to join. And I think that part of the interest in including this wildlife program as one of these integrated programs that get a financial incentive is on these wildlife ecosystem health linkages, and the fact that the COVID-19 pandemic elevated these potential risks and the need to promote One Health approaches. So there's a good opportunity there for countries that access Jeff financing to use that for similar work. And within that program, we see the opportunity to adopt One Health approaches at a landscape level, including looking at health risks through human-wildlife conflict or human livestock-wildlife interfaces, or how could you bring health risk into measures to combat illegal wildlife trade or legal wildlife trade that's in products that are high health risk for humans. So 2 opportunities there. So anyone that's interested, I'd encourage to engage in the national Jeff prioritization process. At the Global Wildlife Program, we'll certainly be looking to see how we can share these lessons from Thailand and use them as an example to other interested countries on what they can do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I think it's very encouraging to hear that wildlife work will be prioritized in the Jeff 8 cycle. So hopefully we can run another effective campaign that, based on our research again. Now, I'd like to hear from the leader in the field of SBCC, Gayle. So it seems that the campaign is quite effective in increasing social unacceptability in consuming illegal wild meat, but still not quite enough to convince die-hard wildlife consumer to change their mind yet. So how the finding of this project linked with the greater community of practice? Over to you, Gayle.
Great, thank you very much, Petch. And yeah, really nice to hear the reflections from my co-panelists there as well. Thank you. So one of the interesting things that I got excited about with this initiative was that actually motivations for wildlife consumption do often include things like aspiration, curiosity, a desire for an experience that's novel. And so the interpretation that we were able to develop in concert with the creative agency in Thailand became quite inspiring and a good example of how to sort of invoke empathy amongst your target audience, but without also invoking misery. And this has important kind of resonance with increasing recognition about the role of social and behaviour change, and how in order to sort of persuade effective changes across larger cohorts of society, we should be trying to avoid messages that focus on misery or extinction threats, and instead kind of focus on benefits to people and how you can generate a positive kind of social vibe that they can gather around. And I thought this Kind Dining initiative really did provide a great example of that. Clearly, it also kind of really underlined, the need to be able to deliver social and behaviour change initiatives for longer and to be able to adapt your approach over time. So plenty of good kind of insight there, I think, that can help other social and behaviour change community members around the world. As Lisa said, this is not an issue that's unique to Thailand. Many of the kind of issues that are encountered by Thailand are relevant to other countries and regions around the world. So our hope very much is that by being as open as possible with the research findings and the approach, this will really help empower other countries to take an informed and evidence-based approach to their own work. And I know that the team here, are very happy to receive inquiries either during or after this webinar to respond to that more. I think some other things that I would just encourage people to have a look at if they're interested in digging in a bit more into how to sort of interpret consumer research and develop creative approaches consistently in the pieces of research that Traffic's been involved in beyond this particular case study. You know, people consistently feedback it's really hard once you've got your consumer insight to understand what to do with it and how to come up with a creative message that responds to that. So if you're interested to learn from both our experience and other pieces of work in the field, I would encourage you to have a look at something called Branding Biodiversity, which has been produced by a group called Futera. This also is available through the IUCN Commission on Education and Communications. They have a Love Not Lost toolkit. I think people will be interested in that if they've not seen it before. And most recently this year, the One Planet Network, which sits under the UN Consumer Information Programme on Sustainable Consumption and Production, they've produced a biodiversity communications toolkit. So lots of good examples that kind of build on this idea of invoking empathy without misery, available in each of those resources. So I'll stop there, but yeah, really exciting to be part of this, and thanks to all for a really exciting collaboration, very enjoyable partnership as well. So thank you so much. Back to you, Petch.
Thank you so much, Gayle. That's a lot of good insight, and I think I agree that, you know, the work on the demand reduction has really just started, and it should be shaped in a way that we can scale up. Perhaps one kind of, you know, remaining question. I was jokingly talking that, you know, we start to run this campaign amid the pandemic. So you know, we use the message. I think the Department of National Park also run the health risk campaign about the wildlife meat even earlier, you know, almost at the beginning of COVID. So, but now as we're coming out of the pandemic, do you think the message is still relevant to larger audience, or people just, you know, started to forget already? Lisa, would you like to take on that one?
Thanks, Pat. Absolutely, I think it's still relevant. I think a key thing is that COVID-19 pandemic raised awareness of these interconnections between wildlife ecosystems and human well-being. We knew them, but maybe it like re-emphasized the importance of them. And I think, you know, what we heard today gives us an example of what can be done at that interface. I think that, you know, it's shown the opportunity for collaboration across sectors that may not be collaborating, and to bring in new partners such as the health sector, which might not have been traditional partners, which I think has been really beneficial. And I think we've seen that, you know, One Health approaches can provide added value over solutions that don't consider this interconnectedness. And if you look at the World Bank, One Health is now a corporate priority of the World Bank. And this is because, you know, this awareness that major outbreaks of emerging infectious diseases can reverse years of progress in development. I think if you look at the global economy contracted by over 4% in 2020 due to COVID-19, and the annual cost of prevention and preparedness is less than 1% of the cost of the current pandemic. So on these economic numbers alone and the impact on development is why I think, you know, One Health approaches are incredibly relevant. Looking at, you know, socioeconomic factors and development on that reason. So thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. We have a couple of minutes. There's one question from the audience, Ritima, asking that does conservation investment in particular species help in reducing the dependency on that species? I think if I understand correctly, like if the species as a flagship species really help awareness, but not so much on the species that perhaps less known, such as pangolin. Is that the case from your experience, Gayle?
Thanks very much, Petch and Redeemer, for the question. I guess, yes, certainly. There are some examples of this in particular in relation to wild plant protection. So, you know, there are habitats where wild plants are unsustainably harvested and where management systems, when they're brought in, can benefit livelihoods in the area, as well as protect landscapes and therefore benefit the species that live in those landscapes, as part of kind of a focused investment in wild plants. And it's quite interesting to think about, you know, the use of flagships and how we think about flagships within that set of quite compelling case studies. I'll find the link and post it in the chat so people can have a look, because flagships are kind of a good vehicle for mobilizing public attention, and typically the species that fit that kind of colloquial definition, if you like, are mammals and big mammals, keystone species in a biological sense. And you know, that list has also kind of been whittled down in recent years, I guess, to pachyderms, pangolins and big cats, so that it can bring benefits, in particular where landscape protection is part of what we do to invest in protection for those species. But I guess I would encourage us to think more broadly about, you know, the use of flagships where maybe less traditional kind of flagship species and those that we wouldn't necessarily think of as charismatic can actually generate huge amounts of benefit for multiple species in their ecosystems. So it is a compelling approach. I do think it needs to be balanced by recognition that, you know, say with demand reduction, the effort has largely been invested in a few of these megafauna species in particular in recent years, partly because there's recognition of the scale of the threat to those species. But at the same time, you know, there's upwards of 6,000 species involved in illegal trade, according to some recent analyses. And so there's much more that could be done for those with demand reduction efforts in particular. So perhaps a bit of a complex answer, but in general, the one-word answer would be yes, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you, Gayle. So a couple of questions that direct to Daniel about the baseline study. So regality doesn't seem to be a concern among potential consumer, according to the baseline survey. Is this correct? And I mean, Daniel already answered in the chat, but he can answer again. Another question is also for illegal wild meat. It would be useful to learn the outlet and platform where consumer acquire the product. Did you ask this question at the baseline survey? So Daniel can.
Thanks. Yes, so the illegality of purchase was the third most popular reason that people stated for, the third most commonly stated reason that people stated for having stopped eating wild meat. So while it was a lot lower than welfare and conservation issues, it is still an important point. So 32, I think, %, about a third of the people who had stopped eating wild meat cited this as one of the reasons that they had stopped eating it. So it is a relevant and important point. And for the outlets, we did ask that. So we asked people where they had acquired the wild meat, and primarily it was, or where they'd eaten it and where they had bought it from. So we do have that information. We have a lot of questions that we didn't include in the presentation just because of time. So there are a lot of further insights that we got from the original study.
Thank you. And also thank you, Gayle, for the reference that she shared in the chat box as well. Okay. Do we have any more questions? I'll look at the question now. Okay. We still have, yep, please.
Yeah, I think there aren't any more questions in the chat, but we do encourage everyone, if you do have a question, please pop it in the Q&A box, as we do have about 5 minutes left in the webinar.
Mm-hmm.
Petch, maybe you can continue talking with me, the panelists here, and we do encourage the participants to otherwise put in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to your questions. And we are also sharing in the chat box various links to our website and YouTube channels. We'll follow up emails with the reports, and Gayle is also sharing some information there.
Okay.
So
perhaps in terms of effectiveness, because how to balance monitoring and evaluation, because to do that rigorously like this campaign, it really require quite substantial funding and resources as well. I think for some of the country, for a government-run campaign, for example, I'm not sure if they can sort of set aside the resource that perhaps necessary to do such a rigorous evaluation. Do you have any advice how to balance sort of the investment on this front? Perhaps Gayle again.
Yeah, I can take that one. Yeah, it's a tricky area. I think we've delivered enough social research processes in recent years as a community to understand what delivers value in terms of insight and the duration these processes take. I think that is the reality. If we were working in the private sector, looking at consumer preference for everyday household products, many private sector firms use exactly the same approaches that we're trying to apply here for conservation. There is increasing recognition and dialogue, I would say, around where the behaviours are sensitive and where consumers may not always be honest about what they're doing in public opinion polls. There is a recognition that different research approaches do need to be employed, and there's been material published recently about some of the considerations with that. So typically, good practice would be to adopt a mix of what I would term opinion and observation-based methods. So the opinion-based methods are very much those like the surveys that Daniel and GlobeScan have conducted, also with things like focus groups. So if you don't need nationally representative data and you want sort of rich insights, a qualitative piece of research could be conducted. But I do think there's a lot more that we could be doing with triangulating that data with other data sets that are perhaps more observation based. So thinking about market research as an approach, looking at how products are retailed, whether that be online or in a physical environment, what attributes of the product are marketed, suggests what consumers desire when they go out to buy them. Price is a factor, tracking change in price is also very important. Maybe even considering, sensitive research approaches with retailers to try to just get a more holistic picture of what's happening in marketplaces where illegal products are being consumed. And I do recognise that there are, perhaps prohibitive level of cost and time associated with those approaches. But I would encourage us to, as a community, try to come up with some ways to overcome those challenges. And again, I can post another link in the chat to some of the latest material on this, but I do think it's an area of sort of rich and ongoing discussion about, sensitive techniques. There are many established sensitive research techniques available in social science, but many conservationists and those delivering demand reduction initiatives are not specialists in those fields. So, how do we acquire that skill set, and what's a reasonable balance? Still requires kind of ongoing discussion and collaboration, I would say.
Thanks so much, Gayle. I think we do have limited of time since our panelists, some of our panelists will have to leave immediately to join another session as well. So I'd like to go back to Eileen, right, to kind of sort of wrap up this today's webinar. But thank you for all the panelists, and it has been very enlightening to hear about your reflection. And I think you all highlight very important point about the demand reduction work and also the overall of illegal wildlife trade addressing as well. I think if we have time, we would like to hear more about the DNP portfolio in terms of addressing issue, as I think, you know, demand reduction will be incorporated into the portfolio of work as well. But so thank you very much for all the panelists for sharing your view today. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Petch, and again, we thank everyone that has joined us today for the Social and Behavior Change Community of Practice webinar and our initial lessons learned from the Kind Dining campaign. We really thank all the presenters and panelists for their time and expertise, not only providing sharing their experience here, but also in designing and implementing social and behavior change communications and monitoring and evaluation, which they have shared a bit with us today on their experiences. We also would like to thank all the participants. We do apologize. This was, you know, a brief webinar, but we do thank those who did ask some questions and to stimulate the discussion further. And while it was brief, we do hope it has given you some insights and challenges regarding designing and delivering campaigns, and for our Kind Dining campaign in particular, and some lessons learned along the way. It is extremely challenging to change human behavior, and as a community of practice, we're always learning, and we hope that through sharing our experience today, will help you in designing your own campaigns and also building a foundation of sharing lessons learned and experience and reports, as I know some of the chat participants have asked for. So the webinar itself has been recorded, and we will follow up with an email to everyone who has been registered with the recording afterwards. Other content will be shared, as Gayle has mentioned in the chat, to the Change Wildlife Consumers website. We will follow up with links to all the reports and also contact information from each of our speakers and panelists today. So we do encourage you, if you do have follow-up questions, please do contact us. And we will also in that follow-up send a short survey, and we would appreciate if you would complete it so we can get to know a little bit about who has joined us today and hopefully continue discussions from there. So once again, we thank you all for attending, all of the speakers and panelists, and we wish you very good work in whatever you're doing, and a great day or evening from wherever people are joining us from today. And it has been great to see from Gabon and other areas in some of the chats. So thank you all for joining, and we will sign off for now.